Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first of our new webinar series. Today's webinar will focus on cybersecurity. I'm Chris Smith, the Customer Sales Director here at Service Express, and I'll be your host. Now, throughout the webinar, please feel free to post any questions in the chat. My colleague, Brian Watchman, who's already on here, will be partnering with me today to monitor the chat. So I'm also delighted to have our guest joining us today. On our panel, we have Adrian Lowe, Senior Cloud Systems Engineer from Veeam. Adrian, wonderful to have you with us.
No problem, glad to be here.
And Matthew Fordham, Senior Technical Specialist for IBM Storage from IBM. Matt, great to have you here with us as well.
Hey Chris, thanks for having me.
And finally, Darren Smith, our Head of Product Management and Innovation here at Service Express. Darren, good to have you here with us as well.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Okay, so our topic for today will be mitigating the risk of ransomware attack with the right disaster recovery plan. So I think most attendees will already know that the risk of cybercrime has consistently increased over recent times, and many businesses are waking up to the fact that it's not if it will happen, it's more when it will happen. So recently with things like ransomware on the rise, some businesses have had to find more budget to cover this increasing cybersecurity need and complexity, and some even opt for insurance to cover the costs should such an event occur. Now, while there have been many publicized instances of ransomware, there are many, many more that have been kept quiet. And what's clear from is the cost of these attacks are increasing at an almost exponential rate. So when you start to bring these factors together and also combine it with the potential or the criminalization of paying ransoms, and insurance providers actually now looking to stop covering these events because it's costing them money, businesses are left in a situation where they need to step up and protect themselves. But it's not a simple task. There's no one silver bullet that will magically protect you. It takes a combination of technologies to help here. So what I want to do is start by discussing with the panelists some of the statistics that we had on rolling on the screen at the start. Don't worry if you missed that. We'll cover that in a second. From my point of view, they make for some very, very sobering contemplation. So I'm going to start with the first one. So between 2018 and 2020, ransomware exploded by over 400%. So Matt, I'm going to start with you if that's okay. Don't want to put you on the spot. What does this statistic mean to you?
Great, thanks for putting me on the spot, Chris. So yeah, absolutely happy to start with that. I mean, it's driving everything we do in terms of our approach to customers and what we need to do from a development point of view. So that statistic is it's so alarming, it's so real. And obviously the key thing is just helping our customers as quickly as we can from a technology provider point of view. As you'll hear from both myself and Adrian, it's absolutely vital that we put maximum effort into creating technologies and approaches and skills to help put these kind of solutions together that really helps customers protect against that threat, because that threat is so real, it's on the rise. And for any of us that have talked to customers and had to deal with that whole situation of when they've been attacked, that whole recovery situation, there's frankly no nice stories that come out of that unless they are truly, truly well protected.
Sorry to interrupt, Matt. Yeah. So one of the things that I know IBM has done over the recent years is made this huge investment in security and the security product sets that it can sell to customers. So what kind of impact have you found that these attacks have on the businesses?
Yeah, there's one that really sticks massively in my mind, because we had those affected talking to other customers on a similar panel to this situation we're in right now, and when they described the impact of being 6 months down the line, still only 70% recovered after a ransomware encryption attack, essentially. 6 months and still not up to fully recovered in terms of data and services. It really paints the picture in a very stark and dark way for anybody that's listening as to, we can't get hit. We see from our analysis across all of our customers that on average, it can be in the many millions, $4.5 to $5 million dollars in total damage costs is really the impact that you're talking about here. It obviously varies, but that is an average cost, and that's not just the large businesses. The real key thing here is that every kind of business and every kind of operation is at risk. So it's incredibly scary in terms of the rise. It's incredibly scary in terms of the numbers that you're talking about in terms of overall collateral damage, actual damage, lost revenue, lost sort of time from actually being able to transact whatever that business is into, and reputation damage. Things that you really struggle to recover from.
I was going to say, if you didn't mention it yourself, reputational damage, that's an unquantifiable problem here, isn't it? Because if you're holding on to a customer's data and you have found yourself to be susceptible to this kind of thing, where's the trust?
Yeah.
Does anybody else have anything else to comment on that subject? Adrian, you've come off mute.
Yeah, no, so absolutely. So the rise of 400%, as well as you rightly said, obviously that was the COVID era, which I'll come on to later on. That drove a massive attack vector, essentially. So everybody's going online. We all do it ourselves. You've got banking apps, you've got emails. 90% of emails tend to be from the opening gambit of phishing attacks as well. So as Matt said earlier, it's just about creating a relevant sort of products and tool sets and methodologies in place to mitigate against that. And Chris, I know we're going to cover it off later on as well, but it's just highlighting that ransomware attackers don't just go for certain verticals and markets and so on. There's a whole, it's a big area for them guys to exploit. And yeah, it's just what we can do to help rectify that, essentially. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and I guess with that spectrum of different attacks, that's the main reason why there's not a single silver bullet to deal with this, right? Okay, so we'll move on to the next one if that's okay. So I can see with the statistics that we showed earlier that there's a little bit of a thread around take up and adoption. So there's two that stood out for me. So the volume of investment in cybersecurity is led by medium-sized businesses, followed by large, small, and then micro. And then if we couple that with 43% of cyber attacks are aimed at small businesses, but only 14% are prepared to defend themselves. So, Adrian, if you can respond to this one for me. So from a Veeam point of view, do you see that kind of profile in customers, and what's the impact?
Yeah, and exactly that. So it's not that, again, what I just said before it's not that cyber attacks focus on certain verticals. However, those small to medium-sized businesses just don't have the resources or the financial sort of clout to help defend themselves. And you said it earlier as well, Chris, which is not a case of when you get attacked, or sorry, if you get attacked, it's when. So again, just using ServiceNow or Service Express, and the best of breed sort of technology, it's just how they can help, protect against those as well. But yeah, exactly that. We do see it as a sweet spot and a very vulnerable area as well. So yeah, just using best of breed sort of services to sort of protect against those, essentially.
Yeah, and I think as well, the explosion of this and these extra costs, no one's got extra budget, right? It's just that you've got this is a new thing I need to spend money on now, although very important. I can understand why that smaller area and sector of businesses is maybe struggling to keep up with it, because it's a lot to handle on your own. I don't know, Matt, have you seen a similar trend around that as well?
Definitely, yes. I think it's very, very clear that, again, there's no sort of ideal kind of target, as you've talked about. It's quite scary just in terms of how many small schools, colleges, things getting places getting attacked that you kind of question why is it, why does this happen? But everybody of any shape or size has to protect themselves. So we literally work with everyone across those kind of different sectors, industries, shapes and sizes, and obviously cost is a huge thing. But we're seeing security budgets maybe being there, but not understanding the technology that needs to go in with them. So we have to make sure that we're having the conversations with the right people in the larger organizations when IT are trying to battle with it, or, versus security trying to throw products at it. And a lot of customers buy a lot of products, and not always getting the actual landscape that they really need. It doesn't always, even though there's overlap, it doesn't always give plugging all the right holes and giving them a recovery plan. So we've often thought about working with customers in terms of, have you got backup? Have you got resiliency at a DR, sort of a two-site situation? But the landscape's changed. You've got to accept that things might get through those defenses and might break those recovery plans down pretty quickly. So there's a lot to think about, and the combinations of our both of our vendors, positions is really powerful in the market. I think we bring a lot collectively to the table, but we've just got to help. I mean, this is where Service Express come in. We've got to help our customers navigate it and understand how to package that together and make it right, so that if this happens, we know we can recover and we can get back quickly. So yeah, we're seeing it across the board, and it really is about shaping customers' viewpoints and understanding the technology that's available, not just throwing every kind of piece of technology at it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And so looking at this small business side of things, and your point about a recovery plan and that sort of thing. So what we have found, as in Service Express, is that most businesses now do have a disaster recovery solution. And I can see through small improvements that you can get yourselves on a better footing. And while you might have a massive cybersecurity budget, lucky you if you do, you still have a DR budget. So if you can do something with your disaster recovery, you can potentially mitigate some of these challenges that we've spoken about. So Darren, don't worry, I know you're still there and haven't answered the question. So this one's for you, specifically, because we've been providing what I'd call traditional disaster recovery for many years now, and we're doing basically 3 to 4 customer recovery tests a week. So if you could go into a little bit more detail and describe to me how what I mean by traditional DR and how this changes when we bring cyber risk into the equation. Because for me, things like our recovery time objective and recovery point objective, RTO and RPO, potentially become a secondary consideration.
Yes, that's correct. So if you think of traditional disaster recovery as you have an infrastructure or a hardware failure on site, or you have a lack of denial to the building where your infrastructure sits, then you tend to follow a normal disaster recovery plan of, actually, let's fail this over into our disaster recovery space, stand the infrastructure up there, and then set the connectivity so that we can actually get back in and carry on working as normal. There's no other consideration as to what's gone on with the data or why you've failed across. It's you've had an event, and to recover from that event, we've stood it up somewhere else. Now, when you take cyber into that account, you have to think about, actually, when I stand this data back up, is that data actually safe? So it is more of a, actually, can I get my data back conversation in a way that is usable, and we don't have to go out and pay for the Bitcoin or whatever it is in the ransom to actually get our data back. It's, I want to be able to stand my data up in an isolated space. I want to be able to inspect that data to make sure that any payloads that are sitting in that data space, we can actually take out before we make that data live. So we're not going to have a secondary spread as soon as we start it up again, and then everything becomes infected again. And then you get into a cycle of, I'm not going to be actually longer and longer to be able to recover from that space.
Yeah, and with this multi-vector sort of potential attacks that are happening to businesses, it's not getting any complex, is it? So I think the other statistic as well that jumped out for me is that the 75% of business leaders in the survey cited that challenges with the backup and recovery is an issue, particularly when deploying the hybrid IT cloud strategy. And how do I do this? How can I keep the business protected? How do I get to the data if I need to? And how do I stop it from being corrupted? So Adrian, I'm thinking from Veeam, this is your sweet spot. So, you're a Magic Quadrant market leader. What's your view on this?
So as you rightly said, so Veeam are renowned for sort of iterating and innovating our technology. It stems from doing backups as we're all well aware of. But it's not just backups, it's the ability to recover swiftly. It's to validate those backups as well. So going back to what Darren said, no good backing up if your data sort of tarnished or sort of infected. And as and when that happens, it's recovering that data and sort of making sure you can secure restore with, you know, antiviruses and so on. But even further than that as well, it's intelligently sort of checking that data for sort of unusual suspicious activity, whether there's large backup changes or small backup changes. And yes, you still have the, you know, the reason to do DR to a secondary site and so on and have multiple copies. But essentially using all those functions and features for that multi-layered approach you mentioned earlier, Chris, we have some best practices ourselves in-house. So we have something called the 3-2-1 rule, which is where you have 3 copies of the data on 2 different types of media with 1 off-site. We further extended that with an additional 1 and 0. So the additional 1 is for air gaps. So whether you put it off-site to tape or make it immutable, and then the 0 is to make sure you validate that data as well, as we mentioned earlier, which is just making sure you run the health checks, the secure restores. And that's just one of our best practices to sort of labour into your data protection strategy. There's also something called the NIST framework, which we'll cover off later on. That's not a Veeam piece. That's more of an industry standard whereby you can do an end-to-end sort of mapping of your data protection strategy and harness the products and services that are available to you. And obviously Service Express, you know, that's at the core of your business as well. So hopefully that answers your question, Chris.
Yeah, I think that 3-2-1-1-0 is a really easy way to remember what's required here. The 0 one being really important and kind of links into what I was talking about earlier with our disaster recovery testing and making sure that you've validated that backup and it's going to work and you can recover from it. Thank you for that, Adrian. So the next question I have is probably one of the more sobering ones. Again, another statistic that about the risk not being necessarily from external sources, but roughly 30% come from bad actors from within the business. So potentially people that are within your organization, maybe even in your own IT department. So Matt, I'm going to ask you about this one, please, from an IBM view. You know, what do you think some of those risks are?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very significant piece where we've got the real threat from inside, and we have to put everything we can around being able to react quickly to that situation. So what you see from IBM here in terms of how we're investing in being able to protect and recover against any situation, whether it's ransomware coming in or the bad actor inside, is, you know, early detection is absolutely paramount. It's critical that there is some kind of warning flag that goes off straight away, and then you can do something with that information. So this is real combination of security defenses, spotting, okay, this person's been fired, why are they trying to log in? This person we know is on a target list, why is he logging in at 12 at night? Anything that you can set up around people, bad actors, is going to be critical. And then it's all the triggers that you can do from that point. So, you know, what we bring to the table really that differentiates here is the ability to do very quick copies of data, rapid copies of data from that primary source, keeping it as a primary copy. The defenses that Adrian's talking about, you know, long-term data retention, backup. The great thing about this world is that we're not trying to teach our customers, you know, brand new situations here. You've been doing backup for a long time, and that doesn't change. The technology gets better from the likes of Veeam, from the likes of IBM. It's just the approaches. If you can narrow the window so you catch something happening straight away with a trigger, you have a series of events that happen from that situation, be that primary snapshots, another copy goes off to Veeam, etc. Then you've got those recover points at the point where something is trying to happen. So it's joining up, I guess, in summary is what I'm trying to say. We've got to make sure that the defenses can catch it in the first place. Early detection is critical. And then these copies and the methodologies that follow can be put into use to really recover that data quickly. And we'll dive into that a bit more, I'm sure.
Okay, so and in terms of, you know, a bad actor wanting to access data, if they're highly privileged within an organization, you know, they can manage the data at a SAN level and that sort of thing. What kind of prevention is available there? I'll open it to the panelists.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, it's the triggering of, you know, what's monitoring, as I say, security tools that are monitoring, be that IBM security tools or one of the many other options that the customers might have in place, even events management tools like Splunk. Basically, your security events and incident management system, your SIEM, that's the real sort of the key element in all of this in terms of catching something straight away. And then, of course, our storage products, the same with Veeam, they're very hardened in terms of their security profiles. You've got, you know, the security profiles that are configured as per the customer's environment as it needs to be. And then we can do our snapshotting and our copy technology with additional layers of security profiles. So separation of duties. Somebody's responsible for delivering services on those machines, workloads. They're responsible for provisioning, day-to-day management. The same person is not responsible for the copies and the backups, and that's a clear security level concern that customers are looking for right now. That ability to separate things off.
Yeah, delineation of duties and that sort of thing, really. Okay.
I was gonna labour that as well. So it's almost taking it back to basics of making sure you've got sort of RBAC control in place, network segmentation. And also educating your users. Sometimes a bad user doesn't know they're a bad user if they've just opened a phishing email. So it's just labouring that. And likewise, just also go back to reassessing your internal IT policies. So processes as well. So as somebody comes on board and as somebody leaves, don't forget and leave a stagnated user sort of access there. It's easily done, but just have a policy in place whereby actually automate it if you can, where, you know, Joe Bloggs leaves tomorrow, you know, after a couple of days it's going to leave. You can still retain that data, but they no longer have access to that and as well as your business. So it's just going back to basics and putting some of those hardening best practices into place.
Yeah, that's a good point there as well. Thank you, Adrian. So finally, from the statistics, and then we can continue on. So you know, and this comes from IBM report, Matt. So breach discovery can take up to 197 days, and we mentioned that a moment ago, how quickly you need to react. You know, and there are ways of speeding this up, and I think, Adrian, I'm going to finally come to your point about the NIST framework that you've mentioned a couple of times now. You know, how can that help businesses today to mitigate this risk?
Yeah, absolutely. So the NIST framework, again, it's not a Veeam thing, but essentially it's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. What it is a methodology essentially to help businesses put in place the ability to identify, protect, detect, respond and recover all of your relevant sort of data protection needs. You've just mentioned that statistic about recovering it takes 197 days. Well, if you start implementing these best practices to identify, that will reduce that window massively. And you can start doing this with test beds and so on. Yeah, it's about identifying up front, but sometimes that slips through the net. But then it's what happens once you've got past that point of how did you protect against that, and then how do you recover as well. So personally, I think NIST is certainly a good way to sort of start, put that into your business and sort of map your relevant technology to it, being IBM and Veeam as well. And yeah, I think help reduce that window to get you up and online swiftly.
Thanks. And I know it's Matt, NIST is something that IBM talk about quite a lot as well and recommend.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something that is really good to adhere to work with, and we put it into place where it's about our technology as one thing, but it's also about how we can analyze how a customer is today in terms of we can go through a series of questions, you know, an assessment to work out against that NIST framework, what's their threat score, what's their risk score, what's their capabilities. So that's something we do a lot, just to sort of really sense check where a customer is, because NIST, you know, helps you think about all the different input points or the control points and the risk of you know, I guess the risk of things going wrong, you know, how long does it take to recover and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's quite a frightening statistic around how much ransomware can lie in place, dormant, undetected, how long these things can stay around. And I want to stress, importantly, for your customers, and again, this is what we've been working with Service Express on in terms of the solutions you're putting together. We can absolutely bring the technology that helps you recover quickly. We've also got to have, importantly, that validation piece. Adrian talked about it earlier with their stack, and we absolutely do the same. We've got to think from a client point of view. We present data. We can freeze data in points in time, but if we freeze that problem, we've got to make sure that we validate it and get rid of the problem at the same time as part of that recovery process. So there is a lot to think about, but the frameworks help, and Service Express and IBM Veeam, the combination of technology helps.
Yeah, and I think Darren, from our point of view, we've seen that when there is a breach discovered, we have to work with the customer. Where we spoke earlier about delivering disaster recovery, traditional disaster recovery, and we'll call this cyber recovery, is slightly different, and it's that discovery of it and how you cleanse the data. I suppose that's the main difference between the traditional DR and this sort of cyber recovery thing that I've just said. You can add some more colour to that, I'm sure.
Yes, certainly. So when we've been looking at how we help customers in this sort of situation, we take the sort of full notice, and we've built the NIST framework into the services that we've actually spoken about and worked with Veeam and IBM to actually develop over the last sort of 6 to 12 months. Once we make sure we've got the customer onboarded into our infrastructure or a service, there's a whole piece around actually what is it you need to recover from, what are you protecting from, where are you going to recover to, what is the sort of data, what is your critical data. There's lots of data that you're recovering when you're doing a disaster recovery event, but actually there's a portion of your data that is absolutely critical to your business. That is the piece that you want to concentrate on to make sure that you can recover that in the fastest way possible, so that you can actually carry on processing as a business going forwards. And taking sort of the guidelines around from NIST, we actually have those conversations to make sure that we know what your critical data is. We can help you recover that in the best way possible. We can identify what risks are in that data, and the whole NIST framework has allowed us to have that visibility and that understanding for our customers.
All right, thank you for that, Darren. Hold that thought for just a second. So guys, thanks for adding a little bit of colour and shining light on some of the problems that were reflected in those statistics. Darren, have you got a customer example where we've done that? What was the problem, the impact, options, and the solution?
Yes, so we were in the process of onboarding a financial services customer into a disaster recovery and backup solution. And unfortunately, they had some workloads in public cloud that they didn't quite understand properly and understand how to secure properly. And that public cloud became the attack vector. The virtual machines in public cloud were infected, but that quickly went back through into their infrastructure internally. We were able to actually understand where the breach occurred, and we were able to understand when it occurred, so that we could go back to a place in the backup and recovery services that we'd created to find a good set of data. It wasn't just us though, so we worked very, very closely with specialist security companies to actually help identify what was the cause of the problem and how it infected and how to stop it infecting again. And from that, we helped the customer roll out a whole set of new security policies for public cloud. We helped bring them into a secure infrastructure, and we made sure that their backup and recovery process and disaster recovery tests were put in place. So the customer at that time hadn't done very many disaster recoveries. They hadn't ever proven that the disaster recovery plan worked. In this instance, we were working with them to understand what needs to be recovered, where it needs to be recovered, what are the different platforms. So ransomware does primarily attack the x86, Microsoft and Windows, but there are other platforms that go along this, AIX, IBM. We have had to make sure that all of these platforms were covered in that recovery plan. And then once we restored the customer into an isolated bubble in our infrastructure, we then worked with the external security company to actually make sure that we could clearly identify that the attack payload that had gone into there and remove it before we allowed the customer to go back out and actually use the data. This all took about 72 hours for us to actually get through that whole piece of the puzzle to give them a clean set of data to carry on functioning. If we hadn't had that backup data ourselves and we hadn't started implementing it, that customer would have been in a real problem. The only way they'd have got their data back would have been to pay the ransomware.
I remember that vividly. That was a very, very painful experience for everybody involved. But I think it just shines a light on how things like NIST, something as simple as NIST, can make a difference, because it could have mitigated that whole thing straight up front. Because, you know, I'm not going to blame test and development parts of businesses, but they do have a habit of throwing out systems and servers out there to have a play. Not suggesting by any means that was who was responsible for that. And I do like test and dev people.
Well, kind of taking on from that, shadow IT over the COVID era was a big problem for this, because people were trying to spin up workloads quickly in anywhere they could put them, and actually being able to make sure they were properly secured against all these different attack vectors. If your if your infrastructure team doesn't know that workload is there, they're never going to be able to help you protect it properly. So it's not just about backup and recovery, it's about understanding your infrastructure, where it sits, where the attack vectors can come in, so that you know the best way to recover data from each place and each point in time. So it's about understanding your hybrid infrastructure. If it's in public cloud, if it's in a private service provider cloud, if it's on your site, there's many different ways of protecting that data.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to that NIST point about policies and procedures, assessing your risk. You know, there are plenty of businesses out there that haven't even begun to assess their risk, and that's where you get caught out. So, you know, let's carry on with the theme of customer examples. I like to give real life examples, because I think it really, really does paint the correct picture. So, Adrian, I think you've got a customer example for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So a very similar scenario actually to Darren, and it's all too common, which is also scary. So this was a public services sector. It's a council in the heat of COVID. They've got organically grown over time. They've got multiple sites. They had multiple data protection policies. So it's becoming, you know, a bit of a data protection sprawl, but more so they've got multiple technologies. So they've got physical workloads, they've got virtual workloads, and so on, and file shares spread across these different multiple sites. They were doing offsite backups to tape, and that was fine. That all worked back, you know, at the time when they originally assessed it. However, when they come to recover, they were unable to recover the data, because when they were recovering, what they were proving was actually it was unrecoverable. It had been tarnished. There was no way to validate it. So essentially, it was garbage in, garbage out, which is exactly as we've been sort of labouring here, which is make sure you validate that data and the backup beforehand. And the worst case scenario, once it's committed, and let's just say it is tarnished, it's a way of recovering that fast and swiftly, whilst also validating it again against antivirus checks and so on. More so from that as well, it was just consolidating it and sort of proactively bringing it under one big umbrella and getting a bit of consistency across the board. As I know Darren mentioned there, they had multiple workloads in the public cloud and so on. Similar story here, they had different sort of workloads, and they just needed to get a grasp across the board, create some policies across for compliance, just help reduce the overhead to their IT team, because what this meant to them as a council in the peak of COVID, and we all know what that was like, is once their services and their IT services were affected, they were unable to service their own customers, which is generally, you know, day-to-day people, you know, at home, your bins, your ticketing systems and so on. So it was absolutely paramount that they could get them services up and online swiftly. Before we had Veeam implemented there, that was just impossible. They were burning man hours. I think they quoted about 15 days worth of time effort per year, merely just to try and recover the data. That's not factoring the actual data which they've recovered, which is tarnished, and likewise the downtime, and then obviously the brand association. They're not trying to sell a business, but it still impacts the council overall and just offsets that. So the net result out of that was they would help reduce that overhead. Their IT teams could sort of go a bit more proactive and do more innovative things, and sort of keep systems online a little bit more swiftly rather than firefighting all the time as well. So they were immensely helpful with the solution that put in there. And again, to labour it, it wasn't one single product or feature in there. It was a combination. It was the NIST build-up of sort of identifying those issues and recovery and backup as well.
Yeah, no, I think that recovery timescale is really interesting, which is why it's so important to test that zero you said about earlier, about making sure it's recoverable, making sure you're capable of doing it in that instance. We've been doing DR for years and years, and we know that there have been customers historically that have never been able to test before, and when we get them through a process, it's really, really important that they know how long it's going to take to recover.
Exactly. And just to labour to that as well, another policy just to implement is, like you said, just test regularly. If that's one question you could take away from me today, is what could you recover and test today if you could at the end of the month? And the answer is often usually either absolutely yes, or oh no, we haven't done that until we need to, which is then a little bit too late often or not. So
thanks for that, Adrian. That was really useful. Matt, from an IBM point of view, what kind of customer scenarios have you come across, and what have you had to do to assist?
Yeah, so we obviously span quite a wide mix. I think it's fair to say we often see the financial industry move forward first with technology adoption. In terms of ransomware recoverable, immutable primary storage snapshots. That was a mouthful. In terms of those, we've been developing. We developed first for high-end mainframe enterprise class systems, and they've been out for the last 3 or 4 years. So all of the big banks running sort of enterprise, mainframe level technology have been doing immutable primary snapshots. 3 copies, like that Adrian talked about, on primary storage. Very, very significant enterprise solutions. But what's really powerful is that over the last 3 years, we obviously developed the same technology into let's call it everything from entry level to enterprise primary storage solutions. So it's very easily affordable technology now that has been well cooked and well tested by large financials, and then every kind of customer in between them, and right down to schools, colleges, councils, anything of very, very sort of modest kind of sizes when you're talking about infrastructure. So we have seen a wide mix. I think particularly a couple that stand out. There was a food processing manufacturer that was running on IBM I, which I know is obviously very, very close to the things you do in terms of Service Express, close to your hearts and capabilities. And their big fear was driven by US attacks that have been happening on various similar processing areas, processing plants, etc. And if they were to rely on backup alone, again, exactly to Adrian's point, has been said here, they knew it was going to take them a long time. And with rising costs, you just can't afford to be down and not trading and not processing for any number of days, really. So they wanted to really bring that recovery time way forward into the same IT shift. They're talking about, if we have a problem, we want to be able to recover in the same kind of operating shift hours, and that's what we help them develop through primary storage technology. It doesn't replace backup. They still go off and do the backups. But the interesting thing with this particular client was, we don't want to do it on-prem, we want to do it in public cloud. And again, that's where storage technology at a primary level and backup, but at a primary level, we can do the same immutability of data, whether it's on-prem, in a box, or in public cloud resources in our virtual instances that exist there. And that's exactly what we've helped Service Express develop, is that capability to deliver immutability of snapshots through your cloud services, so that you can have trusted, rapid recoverable scenarios built with validation, and then you still retain your long-term data retention as well, for just in case you haven't caught it in that first instance. So yeah, it's happened across the board in terms of markets and verticals and industries, and as I said at the start, all different shapes and sizes.
And I'm fairly sure an organisation the size of IBM, an organisation the size of Veeam have come across it far too many times. Yes. So and you touched on some of the technical innovations that are helping us deliver that there, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But so while we're back on technology then, so from a Veeam point of view, Adrian, again, I said you Gartner Magic Quadrant on backup and that sort of thing. So what are the technical aspects that Veeam bring to the table that help to mitigate these risks?
Yeah, no, no problem. So yeah, so for example, when you're using Veeam Stack for identifying your workloads, we have something called Veeam One, and that comes with 150 odd reports and so on. The idea here is to sort of help identify, suspicious activity of those sort of backups and so on are happening to detect and protect. You've obviously got the 3-2-1 workload, which you mentioned there, which is part of our protect element of the stack, which we've laboured. And again, as Matt said, there's a mutabilities in there as well. But what I always try to highlight when we first started supporting the mutability is just once you a mutability, for those that don't know, is the ability to almost write once and read many, so you can't delete the data. However, again, as I mentioned earlier, garbage in, garbage out. If your data's in there and it's immutable, you've essentially just got a heavy doorstop of data. So what I like to do is make sure that our customers use, protecting the workloads before it gets committed by running health checks, secure restores. We have another product, not to talk about products and features, but just to labour it, but it's something called virtual labs, whereby I know Darren mentioned earlier, where you can spin up and not only just use your backups for backups, but to actually spin it up and make it tangible. As you mentioned earlier, Chris, something for the test and development guys, they can go and have their own sandbox where they can test this stuff and so on, and sort of play with it and either put it back into production or blow it away because they're happy with the results and so on. So there's a whole wealth of different things we can use here. And not just to label as well, but when you're doing a recovery, something called secure restore, that's the ability to sort of integrate with an antivirus protection. So when you're doing your backup, it will go and probe the antivirus signature and to see if there's any detection before committing that backup. And let's just say, I know there's a really cunning antivirus attacker, and the signature hasn't even been released by the antivirus provider just yet. That backup's going to get committed, and that's fine. You think, oh, crumbs, were now exposed. But once you recover, you can also run that same process to now run against the antivirus protection again, which by that time, hopefully, the antivirus signature should be out there to sort of detect and give you a nice cleansed recovery piece there. And yeah, you've got other bits as well. So I'm talking about functions and features protecting your data, but it's about speed as well. All of this is about making sure your business is online with limited impact and the ability to recover your data near instantaneous, and that's what we can do as well with all the efficiencies of Veeam. So
yeah, and I think that does. I think in summary of that point, I think it was really interesting that you said you don't want to make too much of a heavy doorstop, because you can I don't know if you can over defend, but you can push it so far as to affect the operational viability of a business on a day-to-day basis if you go too far. So it's about balance, right? But that was really interesting. Thank you, Adrian. So from an IBM point of view as well, and you touched on it a little bit in answering the customer side of things. What have IBM been able to develop that is essentially going to help us to help our customers?
Yeah, fundamentally, there's a component of our storage, our primary storage stack, called safeguarded copy, and that is immutability at a snapshot level. So the great technology that Adrian's talking about in terms of backup solutions that Veeam provide, we work with many customers that are enjoying those benefits from the backup side. And I guess the question is, well, if the problem comes in and it attacks Veeam repositories, or it attacks your backup instance, what we talk about is have a copy of the data resources that are required for those services in a immutable snapshot, and therefore you can start to stand up the services that are critical to you recovering and going through all those steps and using those validation tools. Make sure that they are able to stand up in the first place. Hopefully that made sense, but effectively, if you think of where you're running any workload from, it's running from primary storage. If you have a immutable copy of that primary storage right next to it, as long as that primary storage is there and somebody's not walked out the door with it, or that sort of you have another environment, a ring-fenced environment that you can stand up, be it on-prem or in the cloud, then you can make that that copy of data available to start doing your recovery processes, to dive into your Veeam tools, to dive into the IBM tools, any kind of validation that you need to do. So we're talking, the technology that we've come forward with, which is pretty unique, is that primary storage immutable snapshot. Everything else you build around it, this is where Service Express, really come into some power as well for your customers, is that's the important part as well on top. So the technology piece underneath is really important, immutability, as we've both talked about, but then the wrap that you put around it is really important, be that Veeam tools, be that IBM tools or Service Express tools. You will see IBM do a lot more in this space. So because this technology runs on flash technology, super fast primary storage is extremely quick. It means you can mount and validate and do things with that data quickly. And you'll see a lot more from IBM around the package that goes with that. So to automate it, essentially. So we've already released something called our Spectrum Sentinel product. And that's a combination of taking the snapshot, mounting the snapshot, doing a ransomware scan, telling the environment that it's good and it's a good copy. And that's an automated process that can run continuously on a customer's environment. And you'll see that support more applications. So that's application integration for primary storage snapshots. I keep making that distinction, hopefully, because I don't want to sound like we're conflicting or anything. It is another component as part of a customer's recovery plan.
Multi-layered, right? That's what we said at the start. So it's a multi-layered approach. Exactly. Okay. So from a Service Express point of view, as a IBM partner and a Veeam partner, we can deliver these solutions to customers. But Darren, we've combined this into a single solution now, haven't we? So to remove some of the complexity from customers having to deliver it themselves and make it more a component of DR as well.
Yeah, I mean, the way we looked at it is we wanted to get the service right for the customer. There's fantastic technology sitting beneath the service, but we wanted to primarily make sure that the customer understands why they're protecting the data, how they're protecting the data, and what they're protecting the data against. We didn't want to come at it from a technology point of view. I mean, they are underpinned by IBM, and they are technologies, they are underpinned by Veeam technologies, but the service wrap on top of it gives us the ability to actually understand our customers' real needs. We want to be able to listen to our customers, see where their critical data is, understand why they've need to protect certain parts of their data and they're not so worried about other parts of data, because you can recover that in a different way. Things like operating systems you can rebuild very quickly, but the key data on those operating systems is the bit you need to protect. So which is the best way of doing that? Do you just protect the small amount of data, make that immutable? So this is how we've come at it from our service point of view, trying to encompass everything that a customer may want to achieve from this. And there is no magic bullet. This is why we're using different technologies. There's no way that you're going to find one product on the market that covers every platform that we want to cover and can recover in the way a customer wants to recover it from. So our view was, let's take the best bits of everybody's technology, let's put a proper service wrap around it, understand exactly what the customer wants, take into account that 3-2-1-1-0 rule, make sure that we can put in regular testing for customers, because that's the bit that's genuinely missed by most customers, is that they don't test once they put this in place. And then when they have an actual invocation, it hasn't worked for some reason. So we want to make sure that that testing piece is there, ready and available, and they've got the skilled people to stand behind it to actually give back to the customer, so that we know what we're talking about and we can help you deliver it in that situation where it is a real emergency.
Yeah, and when I think about a lot of the services we do, an individual business can stand up this service and run this service on their own, or you can come to a specialist that does it day in, day out. I spoke about us doing 3 or 4 tests a week, recovery tests for our customers. I guess if you're a financial institution, for argument's sake, are you a bank or are you a cyber recovery specialist, IT service provider? You're one or the other. It's very difficult to be both. And that works across all different businesses. So yeah, I guess that's the point. The benefit to the customers is something that we do day in, day out, 365 days a year, and we're experts at it. So that's the benefit for me to customers. Okay, right guys, I think we've covered everything I wanted to cover today, but have we got any questions from the chat, Brian?
Hey, to be fair, you've answered most of them. There was one about testing cyber recovery. There was one about the immutable bits. So I'm going to go ahead and say, Chris, you're good to wrap up, and we can send some questions and answers out to everybody afterwards if there's anything left.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think there's some contact details at the end anyway. So should anyone not have their question answered, here we go. By all means. So we've covered a lot of the current risks today that we see our customers and businesses facing. I think the sad fact of it is, it's not if, it's when you have a ransomware attack. At a high level, you can reduce this risk by using the NIST framework that is industry standard, if you like. And also, we've looked at how the right backup and recovery solution doesn't just help in the disaster recovery situation, but it also helps with the cyber recovery situation. So if you do have any questions around this, if you want to reach out, if you want to understand what your security and cyber risk is, then please use this email address on the final slide here, info_uk@serviceexpress.com. I'd like to thank all the panelists for joining the conversation today. Your insights are invaluable. And I'd like to thank all the attendees for joining us and for your contributions and questions. We will try and answer them all for you. And please reach out to us, as I've said, to learn more about how we can help you protect your business. Thank you.